Hello, and welcome to this short video on distributed leadership. It's an increasingly popular idea, and I've seen it making inroads into education, healthcare, charities, and also businesses. And as I've got a quiet day today, I thought it might be an interesting experiment to play with some technology and put together a 5-minute video on distributed leadership. So, over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about what distributed leadership is. I'm going to talk about how it differs from more traditional perspectives or views on leadership. And I'm going to propose a couple of ideas about how you could begin to introduce it into your own team or into your own organization. So, when you think about great leadership, who or what comes to mind? It's highly likely that you're thinking of an individual, possibly a notable character from history. And the reason for that is that a lot of our thinking around leadership as a society is very much shaped by our past and by the archetypes of our past, who tended to be notable, charismatic, and inspiring people. A lot of our thinking around leadership, though, still orientates to this idea that leaders are in some ways a little bit different to followers, that they have qualities or traits that their followers might look up to or aspire towards, essentially. And this hierarchical perspective on leadership, I think, orientates to some really popular ideas like transformational leadership, which has been around for a while but still is still taught in universities and still popular to this day. Authentic leadership as well, an idea that good leaders are true to their values, that they understand what their values are, and that it's those beliefs, those deeply held beliefs, that inform their decisions and how they interact with their followers. And again, it's a great model. But the problem with these more traditional viewpoints is that they are hierarchical, and the weight of leadership, the responsibility of leadership, sits with the individual. Still, ultimately, the individual leader that makes the decisions and holds the accountability for those decisions. And there are a number of challenges with that viewpoint. So distributed leadership is different to that. It's a much less hierarchical perspective. Rather than leadership and all of that decision making and accountability sitting with one individual, it's shared in the group. Whoever's best placed to take the decision, whoever has the information, can make the decision when the need arises. Rather than needing to pass all of that information and responsibility up the chain, they can make the call as and when they need to. Leadership in this sense is much more about how the group works together. It's the interactions, it's the culture, it's the way that the group works and communicates. That's ultimately what we're looking at. Less about very capable individuals and much more about collaborative groups or teams sharing information and making decisions in a more fluid and possibly dynamic way. So, how do we get motoring with distributed leadership? 3 thoughts. First of all, it's whether people are open-minded to it. I think it's about explaining what distributed leadership is and talking about the possible benefits and the challenges which go with this shared accountability model. And I think then it's seeing whether people are open-minded to it. We need to think about where it doesn't apply as well. There may be certain decisions, perhaps those that require significant financial investment, or where there could be some real reputational harm if things to go wrong, that you might say that those are the parameters which distributed leadership wouldn't apply to. So do people understand what it is, and do they know what the parameters are? Second thing is about psychological safety. Are we in an environment where it's okay to test this out and to get it wrong? And for when people do make decisions and, it doesn't perhaps go to plan, what conversations happen next? So are those learning conversations, or do we unleash fire and brimstone on the person who got it wrong? So again, that's something that's going to really need to be thought through and agreed in the team, or perhaps even in the wider organisation, before we get started with this. But the key thing, I think, and something which perhaps brings it back down to what's absolutely in your control, is coaching conversations. I think that coaching is the pathway to distributed leadership. So if you're in a leadership role, when somebody brings you a challenge or a decision that needs to be made, if you make it for them, then you're moving in the other direction. You're holding onto the power, and we're kind of working in that more hierarchical model. If you instead pass it back to them, you ask them the coaching question, well, what do you think? Or what are your thoughts on what we should go next? Or what are you thinking about our next step? then we're working in this more distributed way. We're sort of encouraging other people in our group or in our environment to start to think and to start to take some ownership of what happens next. And that's the stepping stone, I think, to this distributed leadership model. Ask rather than tell, and rather than solve people's problems for them, it's ask them the right questions to get them to think for themselves.